In 1921, Carl Jung published a book that almost no one was ready for. Psychological Types, 600 pages. Jung said finishing it cost him something, that the work had required him to sit inside a kind of inner tension most people spend their lives avoiding. Most readers fixated on the introvert-extravert division. That part got simplified into something small, turned into a personality quiz used to explain awkwardness at parties. But buried inside was something else. 4 portraits, specific configurations of human personality that the modern world had never learned to see correctly. Not because they were broken, but because the world had built itself entirely around their opposite. And a 5th, not about how you're built, about what you've chosen to do with it. The first portrait Jung called the introverted feeling type. Still waters run deep, he wrote, and then went further. The feelings of this type are intensive rather than extensive. They go into depth, not breadth. An intensive sympathy, shut off from every means of expression, that gains a passionate depth that embraces the misery of a world. This type feels enormously. They register the emotional texture of a room, the weight behind someone's words, the thing that wasn't said. But there is almost no corresponding output. The inner experience is vast, and the outer presentation is quiet to the point of appearing absent. To the blind eyes of the extrovert, Jung wrote, this sympathy looks like coldness, for it does nothing visibly. The misunderstanding becomes a characteristic occurrence in the life of this type. They're not cold. They're full. They've learned through years of not being received to stop showing it. Their inner life tends toward what Jung called concealed religiosity, intimate forms safeguarded from surprise. A journal no one reads, a relationship with music no one else knows the depth of. If you've spent your life carrying something you couldn't explain to anyone who asked, this is the type Jung was describing. The second portrait he called the introverted intuitive. His characterizations here were the most striking in the book. A mystical dreamer, a fantastical crank, a seer of visions, a prophet. That last word is not used loosely. This type perceives most uncommon things, he wrote. They orient by inner patterning, sensing the shape of something before it arrives, not from facts, but from what the unconscious has already assembled before the conscious mind catches up. The problem is communication. If the introverted intuitive would speak what he really perceives, Jung wrote, practically no one would understand him. A certainty with no evidence attached. They learn early that saying what they see tends to go badly. They become known for being hard to read, strange in a way people can't locate. What they actually are is a head, on a clock not running at the same time as everyone else's. Jung was one himself. He knew what it cost. The third portrait he called the introverted thinking type. New views rather than knowledge of new facts are its main concern. This type builds inward. Complete systems of understanding, dense, internally consistent, not designed for external use. The goal isn't persuasion. The goal is comprehension. Jung's example was Kant. Darwin ranges over the wide field of objective reality, he said. Kant restricts himself to critique of knowledge itself. In ordinary life, the person who reads constantly, but says little about it, whose thinking runs several layers deeper than the conversation, who gives an answer that's technically correct and somehow still fails to land, because they answered the real question, not the social one. Their judgment appears cold and inflexible, Jung wrote, because it relates far less to the object than to the subject, to the internal architecture, not the person standing in front of them. They're not difficult. They're somewhere else. The fourth portrait, the introverted sensation type, is the hardest to describe. Fittingly, since it's the configuration least built for description, what distinguishes this type isn't what they feel or think. It's how they receive the world. Perception arrives subjectively. Objects produce an inner resonance that belongs to the person, not the thing encountered. A piece of music doesn't register as sound. It lands in the body and unfolds into something almost spatial. A landscape doesn't produce a thought. It produces a state that's harder to name. The knowing is in the body, and the body doesn't do explanation. This is the person who knows something is wrong before they can say what it is, who walks into a space and feels its history, who cannot account for why certain things affect them as deeply as they do, because the information arrived through a channel that words weren't made for. These 4 types describe different configurations of how a person is built. The 5th is different. It isn't a configuration, it's a choice. Jung called it a threshold. The difference between the individuation process that runs its course unconsciously and the one that is consciously realized, he wrote, is tremendous. In the first case, consciousness nowhere intervenes. The end remains as dark as the beginning. In the second, so much darkness comes to light that consciousness gains in scope and insight. He wasn't describing a spiritual practice or a self-improvement program. He was describing the person who turns to face what they've been carrying, who becomes genuinely curious about the parts of themselves filed under "don't go there." It requires, he said, open conflict with the unconscious, not resolution. Conflict and collaboration at once. He also wrote, in paragraph 825 of Psychological Types, only the passionate yearning of a highly developed mind, for whom the traditional symbol no longer holds the former meaning, can create a new symbol, not intelligent, developed. This 5th type isn't born, it's made. The person who has looked at themselves honestly enough to see what's there, and keeps looking, even when what surfaces is inconvenient. I remember reading the chapter on the introverted feeling type for the first time, about 2 years after leaving hospice. Technically fine. Something less than true. I got to Jung's description of the person whose inner life is vast and outer presentation is quiet, who appears cold to people who can't tell the difference between cold and closed. I set the book down. 12 years in hospice care had required warmth that people could receive, open, legible, professionally expressible. I'd become good at it, better than I'd realized. Reading Jung that afternoon, I understood something I hadn't wanted to look at. I had learned to perform warmth well enough that somewhere in those years I'd forgotten it was a performance. That underneath, something had been safeguarded so long it had almost stopped feeling like mine. The feeling type doesn't perform cold. He learns to perform warm. And sometimes the performance runs long enough that even he can't find the seam. That didn't feel like exposure. It felt like location. There's a difference between being lost and not knowing which terrain you're in. Jung spent 30 years watching the configurations that the world consistently misread. The modern world built its architecture around one type, outward, productive, measurable, and in doing so made the others invisible to themselves, not because they were absent, but because there was no language for what they were. If you recognized yourself in one of these descriptions, even partially, even uncomfortably, that recognition matters. Not because it puts you in a category, because it gives you a name for something that's been present your whole life and may never have had one. He wrote that only the passionate yearning of a highly developed mind, for whom the traditional symbol no longer holds the former meaning, can create a new symbol, the person who no longer fits what they were handed. That has always felt to me like a quiet acknowledgement. The configuration that doesn't match the dominant type isn't a deficiency. It might be the prerequisite. Which one did you recognize?